Hello there, and welcome to the Clone Wars Strikes Back. I mean, the Canon podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld podcast network, or on the network, for in-depth discussion on lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. I am your host, Matthew Neugebauer, and I'm joined across the continent by my co-host, your friend of mine, Mr. Joel Davis. Joel, how are you doing this week?
Don't get us sued. I'm trying to sue Ben for his connection corner. We are
You know,
going to
you know,
get you.
it's part of the deal, part of the arrangement. We got to figure it out. Anyway, yeah. So this week we are joining the rest of the Star Wars podcastiverse by diving all the way into Tales of the Jedi, and to help us out, we got some help here. It is the most from the Central Coast. It is the Thunder from Down Under, our strongest supporter and the newest co-host, most recently from the flagship Star Wars Underworld podcast, but she's got a great channel of her own going to. It's Hannah Rayside. Hannah,
oh my gosh, what an intro. What an intro. Right? Well, g'day there. It is great to be here.
There we go.
We're going to have some great discussions. We're going to have some great fun. It's going to be a fantastic show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm just glad to be chatting with you, actually chatting, talking about before the show, mostly commenting on, you commenting on our channel, our shows, us commenting on your shows.
Yes.
Now we're into the chatting.
We're in one show together.
There we go. Also, I should mention Happy Halloween, everybody. Speaking of Underworld, this isn't gonna last. This is way too warm on me. But Hannah, you go for it as long as you want to.
Thank you.
You be the honorary Torontonian today. Well, I'll be the actual Torontonian that.
Sounds good.
Just can't. Sorry. Outside, I wear a hat. Anyway. So yeah, this week we're definitely getting into Tales of the Jedi. But first, I got to do bit of plugs here. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Oh, wow. That's
I thought that was a part of it. Oh, I thought that was a part of the announcement.
I will.
Hey, check it out. Woo!
Oh
my god.
That's just California for you. No, I'm just kidding.
That's my parking lot.
That's your parking lot. Okay. It's not SoCal life. Anyway, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Canon Podcast, also on Twitch. And or if you're watching us on Twitter right now, welcome to watch us on Twitter and on Twitch. And of course, we're on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel. Also got to mention Tractor Beat comic book reviews every Thursday or Friday. This past week, I got a very intriguing Kofon Ferris angle in Dr. Aphra number 25. So look for that. That's already up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, of course, you can get all of our full episodes right here on if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts shortly after the episodes drop, or we record these live. So watch for that in your podcatchers tonight if you want to listen back, or welcome to listening on audio. A few other ways to get in touch with us. We are, of course, on the Underworld YouTube channel, where we got memberships, we got super chats, we got ways to connect with us. Of course, the flagship Twitter, the Star Wars Underworld, and our own accounts, and of course the Star Wars Underworld Discord. Joel, Hannah, and I are all quite active in there, so definitely give us a shout, give us a chat. I don't know if the link below is quite active, but if you want an active link, just comment below or DM us on socials or whatever. We'll be happy to send you one.
We'll have the key.
Go bug Ben Hart about it.
Yeah, or go bug Ben Hart. He's the one who's really driving this one. We're happy to be around and happy to be involved, but it's his what's the word? Like his baby. Sure, I'll go with that. There we go. Okay, so that got the plugs for now, and then we'll pick up the plugs again at the end, as usual. Let's talk about our week in Star Wars. And so the initial impetus for this episode, for getting you on, Hannah, is you just had the privilege of reading Claudia Gray's Bloodline for the first time, I guess a few months ago, maybe, or whenever it was. And,
yes.
I mean, love to have you on sometime to talk a lot more longer just about Claudia Gray generally, because you've definitely gotten into some of her books. But just for a few minutes, talk about Bloodline. Bring me back to I guess it would have been 2016 when I read it. And
wow.
It's never too late to read, to get into it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I really love this book, and I actually I think we have someone here that might know some more about the book. Hang on, guys. Just give me a second.
Special guest.
Another
Unscripted.
Thunder from Down Under.
Ooh.
I think I know this. Anyway, Joel, how do
It's
you
not true.
remember? You remember Bloodline?
Yeah, I remember 2016, Force
Yeah.
Awakens had just come out, and this was like the prequel to the book back in the day.
Mhm.
I remember reading it.
Ooh.
Oh,
I see. I see. There we go.
Bravo.
So you've ditched the hat. That was an incredible quick costume change.
Hello there. Oh no, that's not me. That's the wrong character.
Very,
Well, she
very
learned
much
it from
influence. Very
Maybe
influence.
she learned a hello there from Obi-Wan.
There you go. There you go. But hi. I can't do a Leia voice. I don't know a Leia voice.
You can do Leia, her Coruscant senator voice. Go for it.
Coruscant senator voice.
Can't do a Carrie Fisher.
I don't know what this. What's a classic Leia line? I can't even think of a quote of hers now.
I mean, everything in Andor is the tighter you clench your fists or whatever, the more star systems slip through your fingers.
Oh, I love
I
it.
don't-
I
no,
love
no,
it.
this
Yeah.
The more you type,
But if I can't fit the headphones
Oh
of
yeah,
the wig, which is hilarious.
that's great.
Check that out.
but they're
Check that out.
So
Got
you
the
won't know what we're
buns.
saying, but that's okay.
Got the buns going. I love it. But no. Here to help Obi-Wan Kenobi, of course.
Mhm.
Turn off that theme now. But let's talk about Bloodline, and of course, for Halloween, I had to dress up as Leia for talking about Bloodline because she's in it so much, and it's her book. It's her book where she shines. I mean, so yeah, Bloodline, fantastic read. It's a great little cross section of what's happening in the galaxy at that time. But it's an even more fascinating deep dive into Princess Leia and kind of really her mind mentality. Of course, we go through some interesting storytelling stories and kind of events that happen in Bloodline. There's kind of a bit of action, bit of chase scenes, bit of like underworld cartel kind of vibe. But it's there's some great scenes of that, but there's also, I think the main thing is this fascinating look into her psyche and specifically, her understanding the Force more and her understanding her bloodline. It took me so long to realize like why it was called Bloodline, but then I finally realized, oh no, because we're talking about how she is processing and like discussing her own bloodline. Kind of really coming to grips with her being Vader's daughter, and even though it's many years after she's learned that, she's still processing that and still realizing what that means. And then, of course, the very dramatic climax of the book is that it gets revealed to the whole entire galaxy, which was insane. I was really, really enthralled with this whole climax of this book. It was really, really well done. Very well like paced and timed and spread out, and then so when it like happened, you like felt it. You're like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? Like, what are they gonna do? What is she gonna do? Like, she felt so isolated apart from a couple of like senator friends, and it was a really, really amazing just end of a book for me. And then it really gave you that question of like, how is this gonna end? How is she gonna bounce back after this? Because clearly we know she's like still around and doing things like later on in canon. So to see how she kind of bounces back from it is really interesting. It was a great book, great read. I really enjoyed it. I think it's definitely one I'm going to like reread in maybe a couple months or like a year or two time to just enjoy again because it was so enjoyable.
Yeah, you mentioned later on in canon, and it's interesting just to, again, for us to revisit it, for you to rereading it for the first time. What was it like reading it now? I mean, the sequel trilogy is over and done. With the buns there we go.
I know. Look ridiculous.
Can you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There we go. I mean, that's the thing with those buns. You just gotta roll. I mean, I'm sure they make headphones that are shaped like.
I'm sure. Yeah, surely like there's buns that are the headphones.
Yeah.
Surely.
That's a joke in Spaceballs. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not coping with these drapes. I keep like just keep getting caught in my hands. Like, how did she walk around like this? How did she like do things with this?
Being a senator
very uncomfortably, according to Carrie.
I feel like Spider-Man or something.
That's great.
Oh man. Anyway, sorry. Yes.
So I mean, what the challenge that the bloodline. I mean, that I mean, all these novels that came out at that time faced was they couldn't give away too much of what would happen. The authors may not have even been able to know
Mm.
too much of what would have happened. But now, we have Shadow of the
I
Sith.
didn't know
We
what was going
have,
to happen.
yeah, they didn't know. I mean, the authors, sure, the filmmakers didn't quite know. We have the Shadow of the Sith. We have Princess and the Scoundrel, that have come out after. What was it like reading Bloodline, knowing and having all of that story of the sequel trilogy, the Rise of the First Order, everything with Kylo Ren, with Ben, navigating his bloodline in the rearview mirror, and then going into this story?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually, because there's so many little just conversations and little comments and little ideas that you pick up on, that it's like, oh, that's like really, that's really about this character in the sequel trilogy, and I could really connect that quite well to the Leia and the Ben we see in the sequel trilogy. And granted, we don't interact with Ben Solo like in the book, but he's like mentioned many times, and she constantly is thinking about where Luke and Ben is, and where they are, and kind of she's kind of thinking about them. So that for me really made a nice connection especially in The Force Awakens, when they're looking for Ben. Like it just I don't know, it just bridged it really nicely for me, that like they do have this bond, but they all like I feel like all three of them have a really big sense of duty. Especially, of course, Leia has a very big sense of duty. She's all about working for her galaxy and for her planets and for peace, and she's all about working for that. And then Han, he's off doing his racer thing, like I forget what it's called now, but he's like head of this race thing that's happening across the galaxy. Ben's off with Luke doing his thing. Like, it's such a big sense of duty, and I think that comes off in the sequels. I think that comes off really well, because one of the big things and I think many people ask, is like, why is Leia and Han not together? Like that was quite a big question, I think, maybe for people maybe not reading any other canon or anything, going into the sequels, but kind of understanding and getting a closer look into their lives, going, oh no, it kind of makes sense. Like, Leia is like in the Senate all the time. She's working hard at her thing. Han is working hard at his thing. Like, they're still married. They still love each other. Like, that's still a connection, but it's like, they're both people of duty. So yeah, for me, it really connected so well to the sequels and actually fleshed out a lot of things for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, that Claudia Gray, it's sold on as a political story. As you know, okay, we had James Luceno's Darth Plagueis. We have other stuff going on with Palpatine, and even the Aftermath trilogy and the politics there. And so we have, okay, Leia in the Senate. Why not? And it turned out to be more of a character story, and kind of getting sucked in there. And it's a great thing. I mean, I think I'm here for it. Claudia Gray. Just and I mean, her prose writing always comes back to me there. So yeah, fair enough. Thank you for reminding us, taking down us down memory lane. And yeah, again, I'm glad you were able to enjoy it, for the first time. Definitely one
Now
of
what are you
the
going to read
classics.
next?
Yeah,
What are you gonna read
Well,
next?
yes, good question. I'm halfway through Princess and the Scoundrel, which
Okay.
I don't know why I'm on like a big Princess Leia year this year, but because I've read Princess Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and then I read Bloodline, and then now I'm on Princess and Scoundrel. So
there we go.
It's all, I'm painting this big Leia picture in my head now.
Yeah.
So it's great.
So
I'm enjoying it.
well, so you'll have to come back and we'll talk about
Leia
on paper.
for sure. It's so good.
That'll be great. There we go.
Just briefly though,
Beautiful.
but it's like the same thing with this book. I'm finding that like this is connecting to Bloodline, because it's like, this is the start of Leia being like, "Ooh, Vader's my father. How do I feel about that?"
Yeah,
it's like very interesting.
Yeah, Beth Revis does a great job bringing us back, into again everything that Claudia Gray laid down there. Excellent. I mean, she's for. I'm going to get to this in a little bit, kind of my theories about what Lucasfilm is thinking, but for one of the big three of the original trilogy, she's got some really meaty stories on paper that, and I'll get to a bit why I think Lucasfilm.
I mean, I think the entire Disney era has pretty much made sure that Leia is the real star of the Star Wars saga.
Yeah,
to heck with Luke, I say, make Leia the main character.
Yeah, I mean that's specific to Leia. Great great point there. Speaking of which, Joel, very very quickly, just because we're got to move on in time. You have some thoughts on maybe what makes a Star Wars show, or what have you been musing around in Star Wars this week?
Well, actually, this was actually inspired by our good friend Hannah, and like what makes a good Star Wars show. By some of your tweets that you've putting out lately, and it's sort of like
provoking.
Yeah, what does make a good Star Wars show? Does it have to have the Star Warsiness, or is it just a good show that makes a Star Wars show? And I just think it's one of those interesting questions as we talk about genre and what is genre. And is Star Wars a genre of its own now? And like superheroes, like is superhero a genre? In some cases, people say yes. And then it's like I don't know, just one of those interesting things you think about as we're getting more and more of these Star Wars shows, and like, are they good Star Wars shows and whatnot? Like some of the more avid Andor fans would always say, like, Andor is too good for Star Wars. A little insulting, perhaps, but I get the sentiment to a certain extent. It's definitely trying to be a little bit more than what Star Wars is used to. So it's just something I've been thinking about lately. I don't really have any definitive conclusions. Like we had talked so much interesting about that bloodline stuff. So, yeah, that's just something I've just been thinking about, inspired by our good friend Hannah here.
Yeah, there we go.
Hannah, do you have any thoughts? It's been a while since you made those tweets. Like, what makes a good Star Wars show?
I do have a bit of a comment on this, and I was gonna do just a little Instagram story about it the other day, but I kept speaking beyond like the time frame because I just had so much to say. So I was like,
so now you have
like,
all the time in the world.
So now I'm like, okay, this is great. This is perfect. Great time. Because I asked the question, what we're talking about here, what Joel's talking about is what is the definition of Star Wars? Because Andor for me has really challenged my idea of Star Wars. Because I kind of at the start of Andor, I was kind of saying things like, oh, I'm not really connecting with this as a Star Wars project yet. So then that made me ask the question, well, what is Star Wars? Like, how is something Star Warsy? Is it the aliens? Is it the Force? Is it lightsabers? Is it, what is it exactly? And I don't think the answer's in what is in the show or a movie or what the content is. I think it's more about what the content does. So I think Star Wars will always be something to discuss, and it has to be something to make us think and make us talk about our own realities in our own world, maybe our own lives, like our personal reflections. And I think it's Star Wars are stories that show us a mirror to provoke us to think, really, and think and reflect and like engage. And that's why it becomes so engaging. People love Luke so much because he's such a great like hero and he's courageous, and people want to, little kids just want to I want to be just like Luke, just as courageous as Luke. And same things with Leia. Little girl, want to grow up as, I won't exclusively say little girls, but any little child might want to say, I want to grow up and be Princess Leia, kind of thing, because she's smart and powerful and she's clever. Like I think it's we are looking to connect with a story. So if Star Wars can connect, that's what Star Wars is. I think my point is, I think that's my rough definition of that question of what is Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, just because my mind went to Gene Roddenberry, the other Star franchise, and him more. I mean, he was the pioneer in taking a show, and in that case, it was set, a couple, literally just centuries. We could point and draw a timeline and say 2300 to 2267 is when this show is set. It was filmed in 1967. It's set in 2267, but it's going to bring up circumstances that make people think about 1967. George Lucas does, in 10 years later, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, make us consider and reflect on the circumstances of the Vietnam War and the growing pessimism of life in the United States, while also the rise of the middle class, the great migration to the suburbs, and all this stuff happening in the 70s, the hippie era. Both the optimism and the pessimism, and how neither of those are actually stable positions, because optimism is kind of vague, and pessimism is doesn't actually help us live. So
That's a good point. Yeah.
yeah, my answer, and there I could go into that more philosophically, but it's just theology time with Matthew. My answer is what makes a good Star Wars story. I'll drill down more specifically. Is it makes us hope. It makes us hope that, you know, whether in our political arrangements more broadly, in our communities, in our own lives, the possibility that we can change, the possibility we can grow, the possibility that we can Rey can find her family in the stars. We can find our family in the stars, or on the internet, or in with our blood relatives, if you know that, if reconciliation there is possible, or just growing up in good healthy families is also something to be celebrated too. Yeah, and maybe, and Hannah, maybe that's, I don't know if this is true, but maybe that's part of the struggle with Andor of the first few episodes. Is here's a guy who needs to be handed a manifesto that I believe says rebellions are built on hope, because he doesn't get it yet. And yeah,
that's good. Yeah, good point.
I mean, I don't know
have that manifesto anymore. They normally don't take jail books. It doesn't look like he has time to read without getting zapped.
He'll find it. He'll find it.
I hope so.
Yeah. So that's my 2 cents on the spot there. I'm gonna call an audible. I was gonna talk about, as promised on the tractor beam, I was gonna talk about Insider number 214, the short story there, but we're talking about Andor already, and so I'm gonna jump to Eyes on Screen. Just talking about Andor episode 8. You know, Hannah, you were on the Underworld, talking all about Andor, and then also on Tales of the Jedi. But and Joel, were you on Doc's channel? Or
I haven't done it yet. I'm doing it.
You weren't yet, okay. But yeah, I mean, we'll have other opportunities elsewhere to do longer deep dives, and certainly when the season's over, we're going to do our classic, joining the rest of the Star Wars podcastiverse, as we sometimes do, talking about this. But I'll dive into just this last episode 8. Very quick thoughts here. I kid you not, it did not even process in my brain to say, look, it's the Snoke actor. I was all, oh, that's cool. That
really?
Yeah, my brain was all, oh, that's cool that Andy Serkis is in Star Wars. I kid you not.
That's so good. That's so good. That's so pure of mind of you. That's so
thank
good.
You. Thank you. It's very hopeful. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating just how sanitized and clean that prison is. And when, you know, we expect an imperial prison, imperial slave camp to be all dirty and rough and everything. But, and, you know, if you get sick, if you get injured, you know, maybe they have ways of dealing with that don't involve killing you. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that was just a fascinating thought about how much, but it's still them plugging themselves into the machine. You know, about Mark's talking about worker alienation and being collapsed into the machine and dissolved into the machine. They're probably making the Death Star is what's probably going on there.
Yes.
So,
that was my theory. Yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's that wonderful poetic thing of, you know, he's helped make the Death Star. Maybe that's part of his thing of saying, oh, shoot, I've helped contribute to this, even if as a slave, basically, stolen off the beach. I've got to be the one to help end it and stop it. And I wonder if that's partly where his character is going. We know there's the poetic thing of he does in the end help destroy the Death Star, indirectly, but clearly part of the story there with Rogue One. Last thing I'll say, and Joel, you know, you talk about transitional episodes and structure. I'm still, we'll see what happens. I'm just thinking about the 3-episode structure here. And I'm liking the consistency of that. And I think it's still continuing.
Well, that's what they said. So that's on the producers. That's the ones who said that.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, like I don't know, like we got this idea that episode 7 was a transitional, and I could see why. I get that. I think in terms of different writers and whatnot. I'm expecting at this point that he breaks out on Wednesday.
I do not.
Yeah, you're not. Okay. And so, I mean, that maybe that's, I don't know, I want to do a friendly wager or something, but, you know, maybe that's that seems would be the structural beat, and
Mm.
I mean, I'd be okay with that just because expectations and pacing in the era of streaming are so tricky. And again, I think the one show that's really got it perfectly was this year, at least, was the Game of Thrones one. Why am I blanking on the name? House of the Dragon. Because it balanced. I mean, other shows have gotten it pretty well too. But yeah, this is a new take on that, and maybe that's a bit of an abstract discussion, but I don't know. We'll see. Again, we'll see what happens in episode 9. Joel, I'll throw this to you. What were your thoughts about episode 8?
Dang, Amazon's factories are getting brutal. Heyo.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that was brutal. Really should have put a content warning at the start. Because of what happens.
This is true.
I'm not gonna say what happens, but
Well, we can spoil it. It's fine.
I know. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna, it's like
in episode
very
9,
dark, very dark.
Yeah.
Something very dark happens, and I totally buy it. Very interesting. Let's see what. Oh yeah, I love the Saw Luthen a moment. It's probably like my most rewatchable scene in the episode. So cool. Just one scene, and it gets so much world building done in like just a second. It's really awesome. It's like all the little groups. Like, who are the human cultists? Isn't the Empire supposed to be somewhat xenophobic? Like, what's too moderate for the human cultist rebel faction? Clearly, they're not joining the rebellion. I think they're going to have a problem with Admiral Akbar.
Never mind Radis and all the rest.
Yeah, and also I love Saw's like the first group he lists, like separatists. Like Saw doesn't probably have these. Saw might not have any love for the separatists still, considering they killed his sister. Even though the separatists were like the OG rebels, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. It's like it's really interesting. And I'm not quite sure about what's one Mothma's daughter. What's her name? Lita. Oh, yeah. Lita. Like everyone's being optimistic about her. I don't know. I think she could be a little Palpatine youth going to school and learning to spy on your parents because the Emperor said so.
Palpatine Jungen. Interesting.
Yeah, a Palpatine youngling. Oh, that's even better.
No, Jungen, like Hitler Jungen. Palpatine Jungen.
Palpatine Jungen. All youngins. That's how they do it in the Empire with the yeah, and Perrin might be more than meets the eye as well. Like he either thinks Mon Mothma just having a blatant affair, or he's gonna rat out Mon Mothma the ISB because he's in bed with them. So I don't know. I'm curious how that all goes down, and kind of what Mon Mothma's whole arc at the end of this episode is. I'm not 100% sure, like where that all leads up to. And of course, Vel and Cinta. Lovely. Who was it who came from the rich family? Was it Vel or Cinta? Somebody was from a rich family.
I want to say it was Vel.
Yeah, was it Vel? I feel like it was Vel.
I think it's Cinta makes the jab.
Some people have said that maybe Vel is like Mon Mothma's other daughter that we don't know about. Rich family, Mon Mothma's rich. I mean, it could be Luthen too, because Luthen, I guess, got.
Yeah, I had a bit of a Luthen vibe there. I thought that
one of those two. It's gonna be Luthen or Mothma.
They're all in cahoots anyway, so.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that, and poor Marva. I like seeing Marva like really middle heart because Marva's my favorite character of Andor right now. She's the old lady who's ready to stick it to the Empire with Mr. Kane. And quite frankly, I feel like she could have whipped more butt than Saw Gerrera ever could. Old lady could take on the whole Empire more than Saw.
Probably true.
But yeah, what an episode. Curious where the next episode is. I hope this isn't the last we see of Saw either. I think there should be more.
I feel like we see him maybe I don't know. We see him in a different kind of shot.
There's a different angle we see him.
Yeah. And there's always stuff we haven't seen, so I hope that's not just the end of him, because you don't bring Forrest Whitaker in just for a little bit. Yeah, you gotta use it a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, good episode. Curious where
Mhm.
next week is, and that prison is disturbing.
Yep. It's true. I
Mm.
mean, maybe that's part of it. The sanitized. It's so disturbing because it's so sanitized. That's true. Yeah, Hannah. I know. Again, you've spoken lots on this here channel, but anything you want to pick out and give us a taste.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this episode was pretty good. I overall I am still trying hard to connect with Andor fully. I made a tweet a couple of weeks ago now. I said Andor is like a 9 out of 10 TV show, but for me it's like a 6 out of 10 Star Wars show. So I'm still kind of trying to get over that hurdle of being like, this is in the Star Wars galaxy. But aside from that, the storytelling here is very, very high quality, I think. And I just, it's almost like if they just gave us a little bit more time in each conversation, I would maybe feel a bit more connected with it. Because every time we start to get like, okay, Mon Moth was like talking about this thing, oh, it cuts away to something. And I feel like we keep missing out on some really awesome scenes. But I love how they're setting up Mon Mothma's character and what she's doing and how she's going about kind of setting up the rebellion. I love Luthen's character. I really love the conversation, of course, he has with Saw. I think that was very insightful into Luthen's character, and I made the mention of this over on the Underworld the other day. Of he shows a lot of fear in that conversation, and literally he says it. Like Saw asked that question to him, which is a brilliant question of like who do you stand for, or what do you stand for, Luthen? Who are you siding with? And he just says, I'm a man in fear, and I'm just doing things out because I'm afraid of what the Empire can become. And I think that's such a real and honest answer of him. And I think it's just so interesting that right now he's kind of one of the heroes of the show. And, for him to be very open to be like, yeah, I'm just acting in fear, man. I don't know what's happening. I'm just trying, not to freak out. I think that was a very vulnerable conversation, which I very much enjoyed. But yeah, pretty good episode though. A pretty good episode. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, he calls himself a coward. I think is the precise word to
that's
tell
right.
to Saw Gerrera,
so-
I'm a coward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cowards.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, you mentioned with Mon Mothma, and I've talked about pacing. I mean, the thing we experience with pacing is frustration. With drawn out pacing. I mean, would you say maybe is that frustrating that you just want more and you're not being given enough about her story? Or
Yeah, I think so. I think, and I don't know if that is just a bias thing because I like Mon Mothma, or it's like it's hard to tell if that's like, oh, it's not a good story because there's not enough Mon Mothma, or if it's just like because I want Mon Mothma. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I do agree with you. Something about the pacing of this isn't my flow that I'm enjoying. I think. Funny enough, but in this episode, I do think it might have clicked a little better in the contrast of like Andor in prison in this very like stark, confronting environment, and Mon Mothma in like the wealth and the prestige of Coruscant, and they're talking about the amazing view and all that kind of stuff. Like that was a pretty good contrast. But I think there's something about the pacing, and I can't even put my finger on it. There's something about the scene succession. I feel like there's too many scenes in a short period of time or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a film critic. There's something there. There's
we
something
need Chris and Dom to come
loving
back
with.
here and help us out. But yeah, I mean, this episode especially, it was very finely chopped,
very choppy
in some parts. I mean, for me at least, I wonder. I mean, I'm not experiencing the frustration in the same way, but we got The Mandalorian, we got Book of Boba Fett, we've got, I mean, we have different. I mean, we have Jedi, we've the Space Wizards, on at least an animated series. We have Rebels. We had
I'll
Clone
just say
Wars.
for those shows, they're very
I just
simple.
want to finish my point, Joel, and just to say, and then it's all good. We have the action, the rebel action. We have the Space Wizards. We haven't had the politicians on screen. We haven't had
Mm.
the things that, I mean, that Joel and I especially nerd out about. I mean, on Twitter, Joel, you have that thread about constitutionalism and the things we keep talking about, bringing up about visions of the Republic, and diving into Mon Mothma's visions of what the Republic is, or even Emma and Holdo's vision, or whoever, Leia's vision. These competing ideas. I mean, the most we've gotten was Saw and his anti-vision. Yeah, I mean, maybe the kind of nerdy fan service that we want is Mon Mothma giving us a political science lesson, and we just haven't really gotten that. And so, I mean, and that's the thing that might be missing. I could go back to the whole J.J. Abrams. Oh, I don't want to talk about politics, whatever, because we got it plenty in the prequels, right? But yeah, I mean, maybe that's we got a taste of it. We're getting a taste of it with Mon Mothma. We want more. At least for me. I don't know if that's for you or either of you, but yeah, I want more. Anyway, Joel, you want to talk about contrasting with those shows?
I mean, for one thing, a lot of those shows are kind of simplistic, right? It's like Grogu and Din go on adventure. They have adventure. Maybe fight bad guys. Kenobi's a little bit more complicated. He's got kind of the machinations of Reva and a little bit of machination with Vader kind of doing his thing. So we got a little bit more there. This, like Tony Gilroy, as we said, didn't really go in wanting to make a Star Wars show. He made him like a spy thriller, like the Bourne films, or well, that's kind of the only thing. Then he got this latest episode was written by someone who wrote House of Cards. You won't get much into House of Cards because, yeah, exactly.
I want House of Cards in space too.
This was last episode was written by Stephen Schiff. I always want to call him something else. Who wrote some show called The Americans, which is about Russian spies in America in the 80s. So they're not really going in with thinking about like bringing the TIE fighters and the lightsabers. Like, here's a spy thriller with instead of Russian KGB, it's ISB. No, it's not the CIA. It's Imperial Standard Bureau. So I think they're very much. I think the other shows have a very different type of mindset compared to this show, which is trying to be more just. I mean, I don't know if it's like the pacing is bad or anything like that. I haven't had trouble with the pacing myself. I do think it's a pacing. I don't think a lot of people who just watch who have. I think who stick with Star Wars is just not done ever in its history.
True. Yeah.
It's not faster, more intense. It's slow and not much going on until a little bit of action until heist episode. So, I think it's just something different, even so radically different.
I mean, here's hoping people get used to it a little more. Yeah, that's what it is. All I know is they got Andy Serkis in Star Wars, guys. But what's still going to be true,
so cool.
Your Snoke theory sucks, and so does mine. I don't just mean yours, I mean everyone's. Anyway, on that note,
I love Andy Serkis. He's so good.
Yeah, he's great. So speaking of Space Wizards and what I would call the greatest television show of all time, greatest television character of all time. So Joel, did something come out on Wednesday? Last Wednesday, I
think there were some tales of some Jedi,
This
telling
Jedi.
some tall tales. Yes, Tales of the Jedi is out. And we are going to talk about. We finally reached the main discussion. Woo! So, you know what? Let's just do round robin overall thoughts, and I'll throw it to Hannah. She is the guest, but your overall thoughts on the show before we start to get to whittle down.
Yeah, this is the most beautiful set of poetry I've ever seen, consumed, ingested. It is so beautiful. I think to prequel fans, this is a beautiful ode to us. I think we really felt the prequelness in these shorts, and so not only the Clone Wars kind of feeling of it, but we felt the prequel, just the long shots. Minimal dialogue, but very punchy dialogue, very meaningful and deep dialogue. But yeah, just the animation of this was incredible. I think for me, the Count Dooku arc was a lot stronger. which is big because I have to say, like, Ahsoka's probably top one favorite, number one favorite character of Star Wars of all time. So that's kind of big for me to say. But I do think the Count Dooku arc was a lot stronger, mainly because we haven't seen him earlier in any, there might be some books and canon, non-canon stuff out there. But on screen, at least, we haven't seen him earlier. So it was just so cool to see. And great little Easter eggs here and there. Great Easter eggs. Very, very tasteful and very purposeful Easter eggs. So, yeah, really loved these shorts.
Awesome. I guess I'll go next. Guys, that was good. That was good. I really like the Count Dooku stuff. I really feel like, at least on screen, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. That this is the first time the character has been done justice ever. I'll get to that later. But yeah, the Ahsoka stuff was cool. I don't really remember it that well, to be quite honest. It's like, I don't feel like I learned anything really new. We'll get to that too. My cat jumping on me.
The cat has appeared. There we go.
Yeah,
I love the cat. Like every episode, there's the cat.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
But let's see. But the baby episode was cute. The Anakin episode, questionable moral choice there. For Anakin's teaching. Just in general, whether or not we're supposed to take it as a good thing or a bad thing. Then the last episode, which we'll get into, and that's why I think I will now hand it over to you, Matthew. Your overall thoughts.
Yeah, my overall thoughts, and then a little later we'll get into some of the controversy. But yeah, my overall thing, yeah, I loved it. I mean, the way you guys have put it, it had the greatest piece of poetry, a meditation on light and dark, and the Jedi navigating light and dark at this time. I do think, I mean, I love the Ahsoka stuff as much as the Dooku stuff. They're just doing two different things. I think Ahsoka's was a little bit more like, what's it called? What were those like 3-minute animated shorts that the 3-minute animated shorts that would fill in moments in the story. Oh my goodness.
The Force of Destiny or the Galaxy of Adventures? There were a bunch of those.
It was on YouTube. I know Mouse Kanata was the framing device, and anyway,
Forces of Destiny.
That was it.
Yeah,
Force of Destiny. It was doing kind of a similar thing of, but in a deeper, richer way. I mean, especially, you talk about that Anakin episode. You think what's gonna happen? What's happening? It's just a training montage. Like we're not, and then you get to the end and like, oh, I see. I mean, even in the middle, and again, we'll talk about the Ahsoka stories in a bit, but but then the Dooku story is more, it's more compact. It's a trilogy proper, so I think that's why they gave the first Ahsoka story to us, and that's the one we saw at the Tales of the Jedi panel at Celebration, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, so we saw that on big screen, and that one held up as on a rewatch fairly well. I knew it was coming, so it was okay, but still very gripping, very exciting.
We were just all high on excitement.
That's true.
At Celebration. So I feel like anything we saw was just like 10 times more incredible.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, I mean, it was very timely. It was very. It was very succinct, and it did a really good job. I mean, especially with the Dooku one, just telling pretty much the story length of a film, maybe even a whole series in half an hour. It was incredibly economical, and a story that was incredibly convincing in its arc of Dooku seeing the Jedi for what they are in that time, and being seduced by Palpatine's vision of what the Jedi are, the Sith's vision of what they are at the time. It does help that we have Attack of the Clones in our head, that we have Phantom Menace in our head, and we have Revenge of the Sith in our head as well. But I mean, it's one of those things where having known Star Wars, it's easy. It's first of all easy to pick up when things are set. I mean, so watching with my parents later, and they were a little unsure. What does this take place? And so it doesn't sugarcoat it. If you know Star Wars the way we do, that episode, first Dooku episode is, that's set well when it is, and then the second one clearly set during Phantom Menace and whatnot, or is it maybe the third one? The second one, and then I'm here for it. I'm loving it. And those are my overall thoughts.
Yeah, this show I think has done something I don't think Star Wars animation has done in a while. And this is not against anything like Bad Batch or even the cat. Oh look, the cat.
There we go.
They like
there we
go.
You should permanently make him a part of the show. You should just.
Well, they don't like. He doesn't like to always sit up there, so.
Yeah, I feel like you should get a really sign our contract.
You should make him like a mini microphone and clip it to the top of the stand.
But I was going to say, the show has done something, and that's nothing against Bad Batch, obviously, or even Star Wars Rebels to a lesser extent, but kind of in the same vein of being a show with some consequence to it. Like, this shows us something that we have never seen. This is Dooku officially becoming the apprentice to Sidious. We have never seen that in canon. I think in Legends there's a story, or at least some hints about what the timeline went down. I won't go into that too much, but this is the first time we've seen Count Dooku's actual fall to the dark side. In Dooku Jedi Lost, we obviously get in the book, we get kind of a hint of that. We kind of get like just right on the edge. Because Dooku leaves the Jedi Temple. We'll get into that. I keep hinting at something big we're about to talk about.
We can talk about that soon.
Okay. But it's not like we don't see like the day. Like here is the day that Count Dooku officially became a Sith Lord. We don't see the day that he officially met Sidious either, and I'm kind of curious how that also went down. If I could like have like a little mini selfish wish, I kind of wish it was all Count Dooku. Tales of Count Dooku. I would watch that. I would love to see the day he and
season 2
Sidious met. Maybe. Kind of hope we go to different eras, but if we have time to talk about that, we'll talk about that later. But can I just talk about Count Dooku? I mean, I don't want to. I know you wanted to talk.
Yeah. We can. You go, it's your show. Go for it.
And like, and I've always felt Dooku has been one of the more developed characters of Star Wars, right? It's like, and he's kind of like the symbol of my problem with the Separatists. Of they are the original rebels. They want to break from the Republic because the Republic is corrupt, and they happen to be correct. But every time we see them, it's like Dooku is like, on Clone Wars especially, it's like, what is today's evil plan, Master? Today we are going to use the machine of doom to destroy the Jedi. Yes, Master, the machine of doom will lead us to victory. Very cartoonishly evil. And then you got Grievous and Ventress, and they're not helping the cause of the cartoonishly evil. So this is like the first time I feel like Dooku's like, oh yeah, this was a man. This was a person who maybe was a little arrogant, a little full of himself, but he had the right idea, just the wrong method of going about it. And it's like he got it wrapped up in his own, not even radicalism, just his own ego. And Palpatine, of course, played on that, and that's how we become Dooku we know in Attack of the Clones and Clone Wars. But Hannah, like, what have your thoughts about Count Dooku as a character have been throughout your Star Wars fandom? And kind of has the show kind of changed your perspective about Dooku in any particular way?
Not to exaggerate, but it's changed my opinion like 100%.
Not to exaggerate at all, but completely.
Like completely, absolutely. What, like 180, completely changed. I Count Dooku, I think was, I think maybe as a younger fan, I found him kind of maybe a bit dry, bit like, oh, he's just kind of like an old man. He's just kind of angry at everyone. He just wants to do his own thing. Especially like in Attack of the Clones, like we do get him a bit, but he's just kind of there and he's just kind of mad. And I didn't really kind of connect with him as like a really interesting, like evil guy. And I did enjoy his character through the Clone Wars. I loved any kind of episode he was in was always actually a pretty interesting episode. But I this has just totally made me connect, and I think maybe that was probably Dave Filoni's goal here, really connect with Count Dooku's kind of what his journey, his moral compass, and understanding his moral compass and where he's been and where we see him go. It makes so much more sense, and in some way, it's almost like an empathy. I feel a bit of empathy for that because he maybe to an extreme point. Well, yes, to an extreme point. He wanted everything to be equal. He wanted people not to suffer. He didn't want people to be wronged against, and he wanted good for everyone. You can argue that he was quite a good person. He was quite a good Jedi in that sense, that he was looking kind of to help a lot of people. But unfortunately, that just leads him obviously to only side with the dark side, the Sith. And so I don't know. I just really, it's like I understand. It's like, okay, yeah, the other side, the Sith, isn't a good thing, but it's like I totally understand where you're going there, man. That's okay. Like I get it. Like the Jedi suppressed you. They didn't listen. Like their kind of ignorance, like kind of made Qui-Gon die. Like I actually understand his journey to his decision making. So where before I just was like, oh yeah, he's just like some cranky man, but now I'm like, oh, I understand. I get why you feel like that, man. Yeah.
Yeah, Dooku.
But yeah.
Yeah, Dooku, I think, kind of suffered in terms of the prequel villains, kind of that middle child syndrome. Like you got Darth Maul.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You got Darth Maul. He's not much of a character in Phantom Menace, but he's cool. He's the attack dog. You got Vader at the end and the Emperor. Like they're iconic. And then just kind of Count Dooku. He's Christopher Lee, and we love Christopher Lee, but still, you can only do so much.
Great.
Very Halloween-y actor.
Oh yes, very true. But a friend of mine, a long time ago, and podcast far away. They were talking about the dark side kind of takes your dreams and your hopes and twists them and turns them into your worst nightmares. And we know Dooku is interesting because his dream is for a more equal galaxy and a more equal system. And because he falls to the dark side, he enables the greatest malevolent system to be enacted upon the galaxy. And sort of like, oh no, my worst nightmare that comes true. That backfired big time.
Yeah.
But Matthew, what about you? What are your thoughts on Dooku have been? Again, I'll even add this, and before reading obviously Dooku Jedi Lost, which I think kind of started this, and obviously now the show. If your opinions on Dooku have changed or evolved over time?
Well, as in light of the show on Wednesday, they've definitely deepened, being enriched. I mean,
good word. Yeah.
Even Dooku Jedi Lost, he leaves the Order primarily so he can go back to Sereno and just become the Count of Sereno. Take on the secular civil land title and wealth and whatnot involved in that. It's a little more of a neutral thing if he just wants to. I mean, his duty to continue his family line and legacy is a part of that. But yeah, I mean, Clone Wars definitely treats him as the beard stroking villain. I mean, kind of like the Christopher Lee vampire type thing going on. And casts the Separatists, Joel, you were mentioning before. The prequels and the Clone Wars really are from the Republic's point of view, and with the exception maybe of the Nina Bonteri arc, the Separatists are really, I mean, they have this grievance against the core
general grievances.
They have these general grievances against the.
That's good. Oh, that's good.
Against this very human-centric core, but in an allegory to what Sidious ends up doing, all these corporate interests end up just playing on that to their own advancement. Especially the Trade Federation and the Commerce Guild and the Techno Union, etc. saying they see an opportunity for profit on the backs of these genuinely disgruntled outer rim civilians. And for in Clone Wars and by Attack of the Clones, especially where it's clear he is a Sith Lord, we think he's primarily in with what the elites of the Separatists are doing, with the banking clan, the Commerce Guild, the Trade Federation, the financial power, just looking to make a quick buck off of a very neoliberal ideology. And here we see, no, wait a minute, there's more to the story. He genuinely believes that the Jedi and the Republic are just not doing it, are not living up to their ideals, are actively working against their ideals by being puppets to power, puppets to, I mean, it gets into kind of maybe competing visions of maybe a social democratic society state or system versus a neoliberal system. But within that, there's also a more I mean, it gets like the bloodline, the populists versus the centrists, and how this is a few decades later, populists care more about what is attending to what is happening on the ground on these planets, like Raxus, like Sereno, like everywhere else. And so probably even Cato no More. Do you want to talk about everything happening on the in Brotherhood on the ground floor, literally, of Cato no More? And so we see Dooku really care and be pulled and tugged in that direction in a way that we haven't seen before. Even again, Kevin Scott doing his best to tell the personal story of Dooku being pulled to his family, to his siblings who end up dying in a tragedy. His father, who was the worst, and trying to undo the damage that his father did. Here's more the political story, more the outreaching concern for the common good. But Hannah, you make the great point, forged in Qui-Gon's death, and he sees this great tragedy of someone who was, I mean, Dooku genuinely saw Qui-Gon as the great beacon of the light in the midst of all this Jedi had fallen to the dark side by being so engulfed in the Republic, in the Republic interests. I mean, that it does recontextualize that whole line when Dooku has Obi-Wan captured on Geonosis. Qui-Gon would have joined me. Well, no, he wouldn't have, but he agreed with some of what he was talking. What he agreed, with some of what we see Dooku really pursue in these episodes. And we see that both in Dooku Jedi Lost. We see the way both Qui-Gon and Dooku study these prophecies and dig in and see things aren't as they should be. We see Master and Apprentice, the influence of this Dooku on Qui-Gon. Not so much, I mean, Qui-Gon comes to it himself in a lot of ways, of someone who is able to see the corporate corruption on a mid-rim, outer-rim planet, and the Jedi are just inept to do anything. I mean, Master and Claudia Gray, Master and Apprentice, my favorite canon novel. To see that, I mean, it really complicates our view of this character in a wonderful way that does, and here this getting a bit into the controversy, does match the vibes of what we see on paper so well and so finely, and expands on it. And again, like talking about with Dooku Jedi Lost, deepens what we see in this character. And so I'm very satisfied with everything we got and with its relationship to paper canon. I know with Ahsoka it's more complicated. We'll get there in a minute, but that's my thoughts on Dooku.
Yeah, I want to just add that I didn't realize I didn't have in the notes. I probably should. His relationship to Qui-Gon. It's like this was Qui-Gon Jinn's master. It's interesting that in Legends, Qui-Gon's death is what pushes Dooku to finally leave the Order. And if we follow the Plagueis novel, he didn't know Palpatine and Sidious was even a thing. But it's kind of interesting that the timeline's sort of a little bit more Dooku was still kind of, I guess,
Yeah.
working for Sidious even when Qui-Gon was still alive. That's I find kind of interesting.
I do want to make a
But,
little quick bit of a canon note here. You want to talk about Dooku going back to the temple? He doesn't have Dooku Jedi lost. He's already left the order. He's welcome to come back to the temple. He's a trusted friend. That bust of him in the library here in our backdrop there. That's not a look at how horrible. Not necessarily cautionary tale. Meant to be a cautionary tale on don't be like those horrible masters. It's this is where we failed to actually keep our own. And so, I mean, that's getting me even to think about Keith Trennis and her influence, who also comes up in Dooku Jedi Lost, and we know is going to be the master who leaves the order, not necessarily leaves the order before. So Dooku showing up at the temple even after he's left the order, not a problem. Ta-da!
yeah.
I'll bring that up.
Look at
There we go.
Ta-da.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's
sorry,
but
Joel, go ahead.
But like it's just sort of interesting, like Qui-Gon has a lot of the same kind of opinions as Dooku, yet I've always said Qui-Gon's the better person inherently, because like
Dooku says Qui-Gon's the better person.
I mean, yeah, so it's like, Dooku probably. I love that Dooku has also a lot of regrets about losing Qui-Gon, even at the end there. It's very interesting. So someone mentioned, I don't remember who, but someone mentioned like the reason why this was Ahsoka and Dooku's story. Like, why did those two? Very interesting. And well, I don't think it's perfectly executed in terms of figuring it out. It is very much Ahsoka and Dooku both kind of, have the realization, the Jedi Order as an institution is, a little messed up. Yeah, you got Mace Windu, Mr. Rules, and the council always doing what the Senate says, which is kind of a more complicated thing. And they both leave the order. Difference is Dooku decides, hey, the creepy dude in the hood who got the evil cackling voice seems like a cool dude. I'm gonna help him out with his thing. And Ahsoka is like continues to be probably the most Jedi of Jedi out there, and continued in her way. So I think it's very much kind of the parallel between the two, but the different path they take. But Hannah, what are your thoughts about them choosing these two characters, Ahsoka and Dooku?
Yeah, well, very similar to what you said there. I think there's a lot of similarities of their kind of path. Like there's different things that influence it, but they both left the order for seeing flaws in the order. And I think that it's really interesting because it continues this idea that there's so much gray in between the light and the dark. And it's like you could almost argue, Ahsoka and Count Dooku are like very like what I just said, they're so similar in thinking, but it's like individually you go, yeah, Count Dooku's evil, he's the Sith, and Ahsoka, she's the light, like she's like, a really great thinking Jedi, forward thinking light side. But it's like they're so similar. And how gray is that then? Like if that's individually they're very opposite, but if you actually compare them and side by side, which I haven't actually thought of before, but if they're side by side together, like you really go, oh, they're kind of hitting the same notes. They kind of went different paths after. But one thing I wanted to mention in this kind of discussion of like the leaving the Jedi and realizing the flaws and seeing the flaws is, I thought it was so brilliant the use of Mace Windu in that episode and his role and influence. And he was he's just so well written in that one episode. Like the episode's like 12 minutes and he's probably only got like a handful of lines, but each line is just like, oh, that's like everything wrong with the Jedi in like one sentence. Oh, geez, come on. So I really think he was such a good wall to bounce off because with his lines, we could then see what Count Dooku was thinking and where his head was at and going. And, the first interaction, Dooku's, saying something about how he wants to investigate, the Jedi, I forget her name, Jedi Master someone.
It's a new character, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And Mace is like, we got to tell the council, like, we can't do it without, we're not on the council. We got to wait for the Senate or the High Council to tell us. And then Dooku just has that great kind of clap back saying, like, you're like such a great Jedi. It wasn't like this, but he was like, you're such a great Jedi, but your just uptightness is too much for me. That's like essentially what he said. That's nothing like the quote, but that's essentially what he said. But he has that line I thought was so brilliant, where it's like, Dooku's really interesting in the fact that he can see like the good in people, but he's like, that will be your downfall. Like, how much you abide the rules is going to be your downfall. Because really, that's what is the downfall of the Jedi to me. They just stuck so much to the rules that they couldn't see reality at all. The state of the Senate, the state of the galaxy, that made that downfall. And ultimately, Ahsoka went on that same journey where she kind of had that distrust of the council as well, kind of built. She's like, she didn't hate them. We can't say, oh, she hated Yoda and she hated Plo Koon and she hated everyone all of a sudden. No, she like loved them really and saw the good in them. But she's like, if you're gonna just stay stuck, if you're just gonna like take someone else's word over mine, I'm out of here. Which so I think that's so perfectly similar.
I couldn't help but think like he loved them and like, well, that maybe Mace would do. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Who's the call to her? These are matters for the Jedi citizen.
Right.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I gotta say, I have mixed thoughts about Mace Windu, because you kind of see, first of all, his upbringing, the world he's being led into, the path he's being set on, but also that there are procedures in place to keep people safe, and that's it. That's his thinking. That's right. His mindset is, we gotta do these things by the book because it's a dangerous situation. And yet the story that we're given both in Clone Wars and in Tales of the Jedi and in the prequels itself is his inability to finally act in the moment. Well, I mean, his downfall, he ultimately gets killed because he acts in the moment, with Darth Sidious on the window. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm gonna always have mixed feelings about this, because I care about rules and orders as servants, and this is the difference. Is Obi-Wan, for example, he's on the council. High Republic Jedi, they've got a council. At their best, they see these procedures and orders as servants of discernment in the moment. And I'm using very weird language here. I'm using very churchy language. Sorry about that. They can hopefully you guys understand what I mean in that.
Yeah, makes sense.
They can actually be guides, but someone like Qui-Gon, someone like Dooku, someone like Ahsoka, someone like Anakin is able to say, okay, well, I'm gonna do this right now. I'm gonna actually get into this business on Canon and Moidia, even though the council told me you're gonna create a diplomatic incident. I mean, everything Anakin gets up to, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, right. I was like, that's like everything.
Yeah. So
down. But yeah, Canon and Moidia.
I mean, maybe what we're getting at is the oscillation of extremes and moving farther and farther apart until it becomes so incredibly difficult to hold the middle, to be a master of the Jedi Order while also wanting to combat corruption, that it gets Qui-Gon killed. And when Qui-Gon is killed, that throws Dooku into that pit, into Sidious arms. With Ahsoka, so here's the thing, is the difference, and I think the difference between the two, where the two end up, their choices, I think that does make all the difference. I think there's something to be said for it's very fascinating storytelling to say, for similar reasons they walk away, but it does, and fascinating storytelling for Mace Windu to be kind of the fulcrum. I did not do that intentionally, but I'm here for it. The fulcrum by which they turn, and his strict obedience to rules and procedures, the very things that Darth Sidious uses and abuses to get Dooku and Ahsoka to leave.
Yeah.
You know, in order that Anakin can actually fall into into Sidious's arms. So yeah, that was fascinating. But again, for Ahsoka, so this is maybe, Joel, this is where you're thinking of it. I wanted to, and I think maybe when I'm able to make the change on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, I'm gonna name this episode, Dooku falls to the dark, Ahsoka perseveres in the light. That's that's the all the difference in their story. And again, here we see, if especially in that last episode with Ahsoka, she could have easily become an Inquisitor. She could have easily become she's just that good at the end. She could have taken over the Inquisitorius or something, or fallen into rage and despair. But ultimately she doesn't. And ultimately she does end up, becoming Fulcrum and serving and being part of the roots and the origins of the rebellion. Yes, it is a violent movement, but it's a movement for protecting the vulnerable, for the Jedi to become what they're meant to be in a time of violence and injustice, to become guardians of peace and justice again. And I mean, that's why she's the greatest character in all of television. And I wonder if, even in her live action series, is she going to get some reference back to this story, back to, again, especially the friendship with Padme, and the friendship with Anakin, and everything we see just even in these very short episodes. Her ability as a 1-year-old kid to stare down this tiger and convince this tiger, "You are not my enemy. I am not your enemy." That to me is all the difference. I think Dooku would have just hacked it to death. So
1-year-old Dooku hacks a tiger to death of the baby.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So.
Well, that's the story they should have started with. Obviously,
yeah, there you go.
But I mean, I'll say it does such a great job of getting at the core of who these two characters are and their story. So.
It's funny that you say, Mace Windu's such a stickler for the rules, and yet if you watch the Revenge of the Sith, the novelization and the lead scenes, it's actually Mace who suggests that they overthrow the Chancellor. Hey, the democratically elected Chancellor I don't like because he might be a Sith Lord. Let's get rid of him.
That's in the film. I mean, that's we're gonna have to take over the thing. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna think about that. That's a great point. I mean, part of me wonders if by that point he's gone full on, I only care about the rules if they serve me at that point. And so generally I don't care about the rules. Right? I mean, when is it? He said we're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And he's the one being the most militaristic and the most militaristic. It's Anakin who says, no, he must stand trial. Obviously trying to preserve his situation with Padme and his mentor, almost that he thinks a death's door. But it's Dooku who says he's too powerful to be kept alive.
Because he got the control of the Senate and the courts.
Which is true, but still, I mean, those are the rules. So in that case, maybe he's finally been broken of that to some extent, but not in the way we needed him to be broken of it.
It's really interesting. His the thing you say just before there, Matthew, of the rules only apply when it serves him. I that's a really good point. I really definitely think that is, at least at the end where we in Revenge of the Sith when we see Mace, that's definitely how he's functioning to me. Whereas the Mace Begin and Tales, I think maybe he hasn't built that ego yet, or that hasn't kind of developed. But I think maybe that happens when he does. I think that there was a lot said when they had that final conversation about the Jedi Council and the seat, and he got it because that other Jedi died, and Dooku was like, "Did you know about this before we left?" And he's like, "Maybe."
I'm as surprised as you are.
Yeah, it's like, what?
I'll just say, but when he's gonna kill, when Mace about to kill Palpatine, Mace makes the point, he's got control of the Senate and the courts because Palpatine was elected and he appointed all those judges. Oh, well, why does that sound familiar? I don't know. Wink, wink.
That never happens in the real world.
Exactly. So it's like I mean, I don't want to turn this too much into a tangent of like when's the time to stop following the rules, and that's the Saw Mon Mothma debate right there. I won't get into it because we got a long way to go. But very interesting, and I guess we followed up long enough. I think it's time we talk about the controversy, both a very real one, and one I think that's just what you expect when you have a multimedia franchise with books, comics, and other things. So, let's talk about the real one first, because I
think they're related, but
they're related, but but I think one's got. I think
one has more, and one's more real than the other.
So they read. So basically the last episode, which I actually don't remember much about. I really didn't pay attention to those Ahsoka ones compared to the Dooku ones because I love the Dooku ones that much. Pretty much a retelling of the Ahsoka novel, another book I don't really remember that much about, but the pressing commentary, and there we go. I might have reservations about the book, but hey, if you want to buy it, still on Amazon, or just still in your bookstores, your local bookstores, comic book shops, what have you. But the pressing issue, and the one I think has a lot of weight to it, is
just keep going.
Ooh, nice.
Nice. That's fine.
It got cool. And it kind of did mention that some of the characters whose names escape me are LGBTQ plus characters. Caden is an LGBTQ plus character of a darker skin tone, from what I remember, and he's not in it, or is it he? They are not in it.
So it's maybe I'll explain this a little bit in just by the way of facts here, just so we're clear on the same page, same pages. So in this novel, Ahsoka, it's set after Order 66, and Ahsoka is on the run. She ends up on a farming planet. She ends up connecting with these. She calls herself Ashla as a secret code. Ends up meeting these two sisters. One of them is about her age. One of them is younger. The one that's about her age, name's Caden Lart, and there's some clear romantic vibes between the two of them. And and what's significant is this novel, 2015. So credit to friend of the pod, Doc Holocron, has an article up on Culture Slate, and this is Joel. This is where you're going here, but in 2015 novel. In 2015, one of the first LGBTQ characters to show up in a Star Wars story. So Joel, that's just the background for it. Joel, you keep going.
Yes, so I hope I'm framing all of this correct. So basically, those characters, at least in this iteration of the tale, do not either full on exist, or the fact that they are LGBTQ plus is not mentioned at all. And because this is a screen thing, this is going to hit more eyes than the book is. Sorry to say, people. But and it's caused some anger among the fans because Filoni did not take into account the LGBTQ plus angle of it when deciding to do his version of the story, which I think is probably the more pressing thing outside of, he wanted to just do his version of the story because this is an LGBTQ plus character, and how many of those do we have on screen when it comes to Star Wars? Not many. Vel and Cinta right now are the biggest ones in India.
I was going to say, shout out to Vel and Cinta.
Yeah. So it's caused some controversy, obviously, as usual. Book v film. Book v canon. That's not the right word. Book v film. Kind of.
Paper versus screen.
Paper versus screen. What takes precedent, etc., etc. And normally I just kind of have a very relaxed, we all know that the film stuff. If the film or a book want to cover the same thing, film's going to take the precedent over it. But the real kind of issue is, again, the erasure of the LGBTQ characters from the film version of this, which is, again, going to have the most eyes on it. Had to end with a nice pun. So, no, Hannah, I'll toss it to you first. What are your thoughts on all this? What have you seen? What have you seen? And kind of what are your just feelings?
It's
Yeah.
This is, I don't know how to say this nicely, but I
You don't have to.
think this is. I don't think Filoni was meaning something negative by this.
No.
And I don't, we could argue that, well, maybe we just didn't see them. Maybe they just weren't on screen. Maybe that, like, they went, I don't know what the other character's name that, like, Ahsoka was dealing with there. Like, that was just a different character. It's just a different perspective of the book. Like, the episode wasn't, like, it is like a pretty much, like, watered, the kind of,
It's very simplified.
What I'm going for. Simplified version of that same storyline. But it wasn't, hey, this is the visual representation of this book. So I feel like it's hard to say, oh, he's eradicated it if it isn't directly that. So I'm kind of the perspective, and I say this as a part of the community of, I don't think he meant something negative by it, and I don't think it means that character was eradicated or they were like, oh, this character can't be in it. I don't think it was that at all. I think this is just a different perspective. They kind of took the story in a very similar way. It wasn't a direct visual representation of the book.
Right.
So I'm not angered by it. But I absolutely do understand how people have their perspectives and can feel like they, that character wasn't shown or represented in the show. But I don't know. I can't stick to that argument because it's not a visual representation of the book. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll just give my piece shots because I think I probably have the least to say. It's like, I get the I think this is probably the more valid criticism of it. Again, I am not the biggest Ahsoka book fan. I don't even remember the episode that much. So I'm not gonna go to bat for it completely, but I totally get why people would be upset in terms of hey, a chance for LGBTQ plus representation in Star Wars that wasn't taken. And I'm sure I do agree. I don't think Filoni was mean about it. I just think at best ignorance and at worst.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
kind of just ignorance. But Matthew, you're our book person.
And I mean, read this in 2015. Yeah, but frankly, along the lines of what you guys have said, and I mean, Hannah, I will say your perspective here is probably the most authentic. No, I'm glad you're here to share that, honestly, because you live it every day. But
I do. Thank you.
Yeah, and shout out to Tilly for helping.
Yes, shout out to Tilly.
But yeah, I mean. So Joel, you're saying, I think a lot of people would say, oh, missed opportunity. People going into this seeing, okay, this was gonna unfold, and say, oh, we expect this now to happen, and it doesn't, and so that feeling of letdown. This is why I do think it actually is connected to the other sort of storytelling bit, is because look, you have all this time to show all this detail. I could bring up the Canon comic. You have all that time to show all that detail, and instead, not instead, and here's the problem. You have all this time to show all this detail and to flesh out all this story, and you also have, with an animated show, the constraints of an animated show, animated short, prologue to Bad Batch. Part of it is the whiplash, the what's happening, why aren't these lining up? And I admit I was, even with the Dooku stuff, I was like, okay, where does this fit? Doing the Wikipedia thing and Force Plus Wikipedia for doing their darndest to make things line up.
So I got to interject. I love your physical expression of
Hallelujah.
And what's happening? My Canon, where's the Canon? What's happening? Oh my god.
Where'd
Yeah.
it go?
Oh, I'm
Where'd it go?
disorientated of canon. Ah, that
So-
was so good.
So
Sorry, yes.
my thing, I think a lot of people, it's in between. So the Ahsoka thing here, it's somewhere in between the Canon Caleb thing, with all that detail about his relationship to the clones, his perspective of Order 66 versus Hunter and I forget who the other, and Crosshair's perspective of Caleb's perspective of Order 66, and then of course Tales of the Jedi with Ahsoka after Order 66. It's or say somewhere between that, and I mean it is bringing up a similarity to with Poe Dameron and his backstory, and how Pablo Hidalgo in a reference book, which always gets overwritten. I count those very much as canon until they're not. But yeah, I mean, we mentioned this before. This is the most egregious thing of what his backstory was of an upstanding member of society, as so many Hispanic people are. And then turns out, oh, he's on Kijimi and he was a drug runner, and all that stuff. So again, I get the feeling of it. That's the beauty of paper, and that's the beauty of paper stories. And the reason I have this here, not just to say, oh, look at this book, it exists. This book is still here. It doesn't have a Legends banner. It's again, I literally got my copy signed by K. Johnston, who, by the way, has been the absolute pro, the most pro through all of this, even if details in Clone Wars and everything got changed and moved around and whatnot. I mean, the best I could say is, what if those stories also happened? What about this? It's a fictional story. You can choose to believe this is the version if you want. In fact, frankly, that's kind of where I lean. This is a better story in terms. This is not a better story. This is more of a story. And with Kanan, it's more of a story, or Caleb. So, I mean, we're dealing with a mythology here. Again, that's not enough to me. I'd rather say, what if they both happened? What if they can both influence our perspective on these characters? Also to say, yeah, but 10 months ago I wouldn't have said that. So Joel, this is all your fault that I'm having a more nuanced perspective on this. But yeah, I mean, again, if you're upset with Tales of the Jedi and you prefer the novel, then say the novel is what you prefer. I mean, I think Dave Filoni would be the first person to say, yeah, go for that. So all I got to say.
Yeah. Although, let's see what happens when High Republic hits, and then if there's a High Republic.
Well, so here's the last thing I want to say is, I do think Lucasfilm recognized this as a problem, and just as a PR problem, as actually alienating some communities. Some really core committed communities that are very small. Joel, you and I, with this podcast, we're a niche. We own that part of the book reading, the more avidly book reading sliver of Star Wars fandom that is overrepresented wonderfully at Star Wars Celebration. I love that. But I think Lucasfilm recognizes that it wasn't a good idea to give such pivotal moments to lead characters, new lead characters of new stories. And so you notice that there is no, they did not give the Ezra Thrawn story into any kind of paper. They are saving that for live action. They, they maybe part of the reason why they haven't done a Din and Grogu tie-in or anything, because they're continuing to save that for live action. Why Rey, certainly after Force Awakens or after the sequel trilogy, and not too much. I mean, we haven't seen too much of Rey in paper canon. The only thing we've really gotten substantively is stuff that just builds on in Shadow of the Sith, stuff that we see on screen already. So I I think they are a lot smarter about this. If if this had been, I hold this in my hands now, and but if this had been greenlit, and by greenlit I mean approved, maybe a year or two after it had been, or was being considered or being pitched, it would not have been written. This book would not have existed. And I get that, and I understand. I mean, it's sad to think of, but also definitely the smarter way to go, and not actually creating the possibility to have this conversation, to say, okay, we're gonna focus screen canon, the key moments of, and that's the thing is the new main characters on screen are likely going to take off, likely to be more popular. So let's dig in and say, okay, they're going to just continue their stories on screen. The legacy characters, this was what I was getting at before. The reason Leia's gotten so much time on paper, Joel, you've said this plenty of times, it's because they're not going to give her too much more on screen to do. They'd have to recast, they'd have to do all that, at least not for now. And then to say what we are getting on paper is more Afra. We're getting a Sanastaros comic. I'm here for that. We've gotten Sabe, we've gotten Ochi of Bastoon, really fleshed out, because we've gotten Kira on paper. And so in part, like Joel, you've said this plenty of times, because they know they're not going to worry about trying to put her on screen, put these especially pivotal moments in their lives. And this is what I'm getting at, is that paper is going to be is now being reserved for maybe pivotal moments of legacy characters, pivotal moments of paper first characters, like everything going on with Afra right now. I think with everything with the Spark Eternal, that's a pivotal character moment of a paper character that I think is going to show up on screen. But pivotal moments in screen first characters, we know the Ezra Thrawn story is going to be continued and in live action, which is exciting, and I'm here for it. To me, that is the synergy we've talked about, we've hoped for, is actually in part staying in their lanes a little more, and a lot smarter on Lucasfilm's part.
Yeah, I'll just end. I do think, though, we are in a place where Afra, Cal Kestis have way better chances of appearing in something screen in the future.
For sure.
But there won't be pivotal stories, though.
Oh, yeah.
For their stories. For other people.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry, keep going.
Oh, no, yeah. Like, with Cobb Vance, he got a moment to shine.
Yeah.
And I maybe can see Cal Kestis maybe running into the Mando or something. Although, I could see them maybe wanting to do an Afra series, maybe on screen. Maybe one day, if it's the money's there. But yeah, and again, I just want to say, if you're upset, we get it. It's a bit more complicated than just, they contradicted the book. This has some very real world representation kind of issues in terms of getting more eyes on screen for LGBTQ characters,
like Afra. Oh my word!
Afra.
You want. I'm for whatever my opinion is worth, one of the best queer characters out there, Chelly Afra. So.
Oh yeah, she would be great for Star Wars. So again, completely understandable. And I do think, I mean, to be fair, I do think the Ahsoka novel was always somewhat on the chopping block, because I think that was one of those stories of, we don't know if we'll ever continue Clone Wars again, because it got canceled and everything. Kind of, we don't know what we're gonna do.
That's a good
and
point.
then Disney Plus happens, and then we get the Siege of Mandalore.
There's something about like Ahsoka's character I find in season 7 of Clone Wars, that for the Ahsoka show, I would be very surprised if they don't hint at that Ahsoka could be bisexual, or some not straight. I think I'll say.
Yeah.
I'll be almost surprised if maybe that isn't hinted at. And I don't think it'll be like a big plot point. But I think maybe, you know, because I got that sense in like the Martez sisters arc where her and what's her name? What's the youngest name?
Was it Rafa?
Rafa?
Tracy
Right, was
Rafa.
Rafa the old one? Who was the youngest?
Yeah, I know who the more innocent, naive one you're talking about.
I definitely got that
Yeah.
feeling there.
Me too. Yeah.
And like that's the thing. And like, you know, it doesn't have to be like a big deal. And I think you know, we mentioned briefly like Vel and Cinta. I think that's a fantastic representation of, you know, a gay couple. And because it's not a big deal. It's not a big announcement. It's not like this big moment we find out. It's like, oh yeah, it's like it's kind of a part of the storyline, and like we find out they're like together, but it's not this big spotlight thing. It's very normal. It's very normalized. It's not strange. It's a very normal thing, which I think we need more of in Star Wars. So yeah, I kind of had this feeling, maybe it's more of a hopeful feeling, that Ahsoka's character might be like that in her show. But
Yeah, like I know a lot of Ahsoka fans who, like, to them Ahsoka is LGBTQ in some way, plus in some way.
Definitely.
So
Trace Martez.
Trace.
That's it. Thank you,
Trace
Dave.
Martez. Thank you.
Oh,
I gotta
gosh.
say, I never ship. I don't like shipping. I think it's overdone.
Really?
I totally
fair
ship
enough.
that one. So I
Oh,
totally
love
do.
it.
Yeah. So
Oh, so
maybe
good.
because I had the Caden Ahsoka story, that maybe helped.
Yeah. I
But
get that.
yeah, the way that character was, that interaction was written, you know.
That Ahsoka novel was the very first Star Wars book I read.
Oh, really?
Fun
Nice.
fact.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I mean,
very first thing I read.
it's early in the new canon. It's 2015. So.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I must have read it then. I think because that
Yeah.
was like peak my Ahsoka love period.
She must have appeared in Rebels at the end of season 1. It must have been around that time, right?
Ahsoka?
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause I
it's
remember,
the
like,
finale of season 1, right?
It must
Where
have
she
been
comes
that
down the
season,
ladder?
yeah.
Yeah. So did that book come out after that happened,
Oh,
or was it
good
during
question.
season 2 of
Google it right
Rebels?
now.
Because I remember, like, there was the time where it's like, you know, we were all mad Clone Wars was over and we're starting new things.
Yeah.
And it's like, what happened to Ahsoka? You know, we never got her conclusion. They all thought she was dead. Because we all thought she was going to die in Order 66. And like, nope, she's alive. And then I remember there was like kind of like an Ahsoka renaissance with this book in season 2. It must have been when season 2, because she had the gray lightsabers.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember there's being something about her headdress thing here, and her just her clothing in general, similar to her look in Rebels. So,
And
even though this
So,
is set,
so the end of Rebels was March 2015, but the Ahsoka novel came out October 2016.
okay,
2016. So
okay,
just over a year, like a year and a bit.
one way to
difference.
find out. I can actually read this.
some
This is the first edition. Yeah, 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So still
We'll
close
start
by, yeah.
wrapping up because we've been doing this for almost 2
Yeah,
hours.
fair enough.
Oh my god!
I did
For
forget
sure.
though to mention, and I guess one more smaller controversy that I'm kind of curious to get people's opinions on is people were not quite sure if we were to take Anakin's training as a positive or a negative, because as a teacher, I don't think you're supposed to be doing that to your students.
A little
And I don't know if
torturous.
we're supposed to say, like,
Yeah, it's
treat
true.
it as like,
It's
well,
rough.
Anakin was tough, but at least she toughened her up to get ready to be murdered. Or it's like,
Yeah.
oh, Anakin, you shouldn't be doing this. This is a big no. Keep away from the kids. It's more ways than one. Keep away from
The end of Siege of Mandalore, the awesomeness that is Siege of Mandalore, the ends justify the means. No, that's not true. But
yeah.
fair enough.
Very
All right.
smart.
Well, I mean, you guys have any last thoughts, Joel, Hannah, before we wrap things up?
Yes, give us a tales of the Resistance, tales of the
Kazuda.
First Order. Because like I think
Where are
there's
they?
Tales
so
of the
much.
Leia.
Yes, boom. You know, I think there's so much world building that can be done there, character building of different characters that we see in sequel trilogy, and I think that would be a very good way to start building up that period. I think the Star Wars fandom is still a little bit spicy over the sequels, so they're not going to come out with like a here's a like General Hux series coming 2024. I don't think they'll do that, but
You never know.
I don't know. You can dream. One can dream. But I think maybe like a little
Mhm.
Clone Wars styled animated short series, like a Tales type of thing.
Mhm.
You know, just kind of going on maybe a couple of those characters. You know, doing like a New Republic Tales where
Yeah.
we kind of look at Holdo and we maybe look at who else is like around at the time. You know, we just kind of get to
Leia?
start to get Leia, I guess, yeah. You know, get a bit more into that area. That's what I want.
I mean, show more of Leia training to be a Jedi because it's Tales of the Jedi.
Oh my god, yeah.
Show
Oh my
Leia
god,
training
yes, that's a
Rey.
good point.
Let's show some
And Leia
Master
training Rey,
Leia.
yeah, later. I mean,
Yeah,
do that.
sure.
I mean, I keep thinking about how do they start telling the Mon Mothma, like I was talking about before, Mon Mothma New Republic politics story. They've got to get to that eventually. Like we're like, I mean, I think Andor's setting that up, but what if they start that? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
but just thinking about the Leia training, there's something. I mean, that's the thing with this show is it actually gave us, especially with Dooku, a really rich kernel that really changed his character for us. I don't think it would change Leia's character, but it would deepen her. There's room to deepen her connection to the Force. I mean, Beth Revis started a little bit, and then of course Rise of Skywalker touched on it, but yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Joel.
I was to say I know who I want for season 2 now: Snoke and Leia.
There you go.
Yeah.
They got the Ben Solo connection.
Yeah.
And Snoke is like my Count Dooku for the sequel. Like a character, like I know there's some untapped potential. I can feel it in my bones and as a writer. So like
wait,
I want
who voices Snoke?
I mean, I guess you can get Andy Serkis back.
That's a joke. Like who? That was a joke.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just got the
that's the storyline though. How Snoke was a imprisoned man, you know, as a manager of the prison, and how he turns into Snoke. That's the storyline there.
Exactly.
There we go. All right. Well, I think that's about time.
I think that's time. We're gonna get some weird theories now.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone who joined us on live, on comments. Had some things going on there. Thanks for commenting down there. Also, thanks for watching later on, listening on Spotify and Apple Podcast. If you liked what you heard, liked what you saw, have thoughts, please do let us know in the comments below, or on Twitter or Instagram. Do give us a like and a share and subscribe to the Underworld channel if you haven't done so already. Hannah Rayside, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, with your unique perspectives all across the board. Where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much, guys, for having me on. It's always a good laugh being on the show. It's always a good time. You can find me at the Rayside, the RAE side. We're going live every Tuesday. I've got my own time there. Every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. That's 10 p.m. Eastern. This week we're making, I keep forgetting the drink name, but I'm just going to call it the Chandrillan cocktail that we saw in Andor episode
the bug
8.
egg cocktail thing.
Yeah, the little worm one, that little thing there. We're going to make that tomorrow, which is very exciting. Nice. You can find my stuff over there, and it's just at the Rayside on my social media at Twitter and Instagram. Yes.
Right on. Joel, where can the good people find you?
You can find me at JID 2021. Again, JID 2021. And I have to use this now before I forget. But Dave H said that it's too bad Dooku left the Jedi and couldn't create the gray side. Well, I think he should have chosen the Ray side, and that would have solved all his problems.
I didn't see that coming. That was so good.
That was really well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's good.
You can follow me at JID 2021, where I tweet some stuff, or you can follow me also at Ion Canon Pod, where I like to post very long tweets about society and Star Wars and Star Wars society. So
constitutionalism.
Yes,
love it. Here for it. Yes, and again, I gotta show you. Thank you everyone for hanging out with us in the chat, hanging out with us in I don't know what I see what she's doing there. Right on. Yes, you can find me on Twitter at NEUG45. There we go. You can find on Instagram at NEUG1138. Tractor Beam coming up. I think I forget what books are going, but a few books coming out this week. Looking forward to that. Also, yes, I will I might do just a special separate one or maybe I'll find time end up this Friday talking about the Tales of Enlightenment, George Mann's short story. I usually wrap that into the Tractor Beam. So yeah, check those out. And of course, check this out, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Next week, Joel, we're going to go nuts on some deep dives.
Something deep and intellectual. I got a few ideas.
There we go. All right. Well, until then, hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Let's pull this thing and head on.